"This restaurant is a joke," she said, loud enough for the table beside them to go still. "And so is he." She didn't look at him when she said it. She was looking at Colton, his hand resting flat on the white tablecloth, his jaw sharp under the chandelier, his expression arranged into the particular shape of a man who already knows he's won. "Have the manager removed," Colton said. "He's interrupting the evening." The maitre defroze. The ownership certificate was issued in the name of a holding company called Meridian Crest Hospitality. The deed for the building it sat in was registered to a man named Elliot Ward Sohn. The man Vanessa Sohn was currently ordering removed from her own anniversary dinner, her husband. Standing 3 feet from her in a gray wool jacket that cost $11 from a Goodwill in Tempe, Arizona, was that man. So what exactly was she planning to do next? If you're new here, this is where real stories live. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without it. Elliot Sohn grew up in a house with a cracked driveway and a father who kept a leather-bound ledger on the kitchen table, not to track debts but to track decisions. Every major financial choice his father ever made was written in that ledger: the month, the figure, the reason, and the outcome. When Elliot was 9, his father showed him an entry from 1987, $14,000. Moved out of savings and into a failing auto parts distributor that most people in their county had written off. The outcome column read, "Sold 2001 at $2 million. "Numbers don't lie," his father told him. "People do. Learn to read the numbers and you'll always know more than the person across the table from you." His father died of a stroke 11 years after showing him that ledger. By then, Elliot had spent every summer and most weekends learning the difference between a balance sheet and a wish list. He went to Arizona State on a partial scholarship and a second job pouring concrete on weekends. He graduated without debt and immediately began doing something no one around him understood: buying distressed hospitality properties, not hotels, not resorts. Restaurants, the kind that had good bones and catastrophically bad ownership. Places where the kitchen was excellent and the margins were destroyed by ego. He would walk in as a consultant, technically accurate since his sole company was registered as a hospitality consulting firm, assess the property, buy the underlying real estate quietly through Meridian Crest, bring in a management team, and let the business recover without ever putting his name anywhere visible. He kept no social media presence. He gave no interviews. He wore clothes that communicated nothing about his worth, which he had discovered early was the most effective form of camouflage available. By the time he was 34, Meridian Crest held a controlling interest in 47 restaurant properties across 9 states. The combined real estate value was assessed at a shade under $340 million. Elliot himself lived in a 2-bedroom house in Scottsdale with a leaky faucet he kept meaning to fix and a truck he'd bought used in 2019. The reason for the concealment was not modesty. It was a lesson learned the harder way. When he was 26, Elliot had been considerably less careful. He had been seeing a woman named Petra, warm, funny, genuinely kind in the early months, and had been open with her about the direction his investments were trending. Not boastful, just honest. She had listened carefully and said very little. 8 weeks after he told her his net worth had crossed 7 figures, she introduced him to her brother, who needed a partner in a real estate development opportunity. Elliot declined politely. She became cold. He ended things. The following month, her brother filed a lawsuit claiming an oral investment agreement had been breached. A suit manufactured entirely from nothing but the fact that Elliot had once had coffee with him. The lawsuit cost Elliot 14 months of legal fees and $72,000 to fully dismiss. After that, he locked the financial information down to 3 people: his attorney, his accountant, and himself. He met Vanessa Calder at a gallery opening he almost didn't attend. A college acquaintance had insisted, and Elliot had gone with the specific intention of leaving after 20 minutes. Vanessa was standing alone in front of a large oil painting, 3 fishing boats on slate gray water, and when he stopped beside her she said, without turning, "I've been trying to figure out if it's dawn or dusk. I keep landing on dusk, but I want it to be dawn." He thought about that sentence for 3 days afterward. They dated for 14 months. She worked as a graphic designer for a mid-size marketing firm, earned a salary that paid her rent and not much else, and had a laugh that started in her shoulders before it reached her face. She did not, in those 14 months, ask him once what his apartment was worth, what his truck said about him, or what his consultant work actually produced. She asked him what he thought about things. She asked him if he was sleeping enough. She asked about the ledger he'd mentioned once in passing, and when he brought it out, she sat with it for 40 minutes, turning pages, asking careful questions. He told her he owned some real estate. That was all he told her, and she didn't push. He believed she didn't care, and at the time that belief was entirely correct. They married on a Thursday in October. Small ceremony, 19 guests, a venue that cost less than most people spend on a single night out. Vanessa had wanted that. She had said, explicitly, "I don't want a performance, I want a promise." He thought about that sentence too, much later. When the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming had grown wide enough to fall into. The shift was not sudden. It never is. It moved the way a tide moves, imperceptible moment to moment, undeniable across 6 months. The first marker was her mother, Rona Calder, who had always been cool toward Elliot but had managed a functional politeness for the first year and a half of their marriage. Then, Vanessa's younger sister purchased a home in Scottsdale's North Corridor, 4 bedrooms, a pool, a 3-car garage, on the strength of her husband Daniel's promotion to regional vice president at a logistics company. Rona attended the housewarming. She came back different. The following Sunday, at dinner at Rona's condominium, she looked at Elliot across the table and said, "Daniel has the young VP track at McClellan. What exactly is the ceiling at your firm?" She said firm the way someone says a word they've been told to be polite about. Elliot answered with something deliberately vague and watched Vanessa's jaw tighten, not at her mother. At him, for the vagueness. That was the first marker. The second marker came 6 weeks later when Vanessa started mentioning a colleague at her agency named Colton Marsh. Initially the mentions were neutral. Colton pitched a new client. Apparently the presentation was impressive. Then they acquired a specific texture. Colton drove up in a Porsche Cayenne yesterday. Apparently he flips properties on the side. Then he was telling me about this incredible place in Cabo. His family has a place there. Can you imagine? Elliot could imagine. He said so mildly. Vanessa looked at him with an expression that was not quite disappointment and not quite contempt, but occupied the territory between them. "I just wonder sometimes," she said, and didn't finish the sentence. He noticed that she had stopped asking him about the ledger. Colton Marsh materialized in person at a company event Vanessa invited Elliot to in late February, a rooftop gathering at a hotel in downtown Scottsdale for her agency's client appreciation night. He was tall, with the particular confidence of a man who has curated every detail of his own appearance to communicate a single message. He wore a watch that Elliot recognized immediately, a vintage Patek Philippe Aquanaut that retailed around $40,000 and whose serial number Elliot happened to know was a common range for the replica market, out of Guangdong. He arrived at their conversation circle with a glass of bourbon and an anecdote about a beach property in Montauk he'd just unloaded for what he described as a little over 2.4. He said a little over 2.4 the way people say amounts they'd like you to ask about. Elliot did not ask. He watched Vanessa ask, watched her lean forward by a fraction of an inch. Watched Colton receive the lean with the practiced ease of a man who'd been collecting exactly that reaction for years. He noted the watch. He noted the Montauk claim. He filed both observations in the part of his mind that ran the same function as his father's ledger. He extended his hand. "Elliot," he said. Colton shook it. "Colton, great place, this hotel." He looked around the rooftop with an appraising expression. "I've looked at a couple of hospitality assets in this corridor. Competitive market." "It is," Elliot said. "You in real estate too?" "Adjacent," Elliot said. Colton's attention was already moving back toward Vanessa. Over the following 4 weeks, Colton's name migrated from occasional to constant in Vanessa's conversation. He was helping her think through a side project. He had connections to people who could actually move things forward. He was the kind of person who knows how to make things happen. Each iteration of the praise came with a companion criticism, unstated but unmistakable, aimed at the man sitting across from her. Rona arrived for Sunday dinner 3 weeks into this period and placed a catalog on the kitchen table, an upscale real estate listing publication for North Scottsdale properties, open to a spread featuring a 6-bedroom home with a pool and a casita. "Daniel and your sister are looking at the Pinnacle Peak area," she said, not looking up from the catalog. "Plenty of room for guests." She did look up then, directly at Elliot. "Is consulting not paying what it used to?" Vanessa did not defend him. He drove home that evening and sat for a while in the truck in his own driveway, looking at the leaky faucet through the kitchen window from outside. He pulled out his phone and texted his attorney, Oliver Reed, a single line, "Keep an eye on incoming inquiries about Meridian Crest." "Something's shifting," Oliver replied in 4 minutes. "Already tracking. We should talk." They talked on a Tuesday morning in Oliver's office, which was exactly the kind of office that communicated seriousness without ornamentation. One plant, one framed license, file cabinets that were always closed. Oliver Reed was 53 years old, had structured the legal architecture of Meridian Crest from the beginning, and had the specific gift of delivering alarming information without his voice varying by a single decibel. He set a printed page on the desk without preamble. It was a business registration document, a freshly filed LLC in the state of Arizona called Calder Marsh Ventures. Calder, Vanessa's maiden name. Marsh, Colton's last name. The company had been incorporated 11 days prior. Elliot looked at the document for a moment. He set it back on the desk without speaking. "There's more," Oliver said. "The registered purpose is hospitality consulting and property acquisition. They've submitted a request through a broker to access the offering memoranda for 3 Meridian Crest properties listed in a private off-market portfolio circulated only to credentialed buyers. Someone told them where to look. She has access to nothing proprietary," Elliot said. "She has access to you, and apparently to your routine because the broker inquiry lists 3 specific properties. All 3 are the ones you toured in the last 60 days. She would have heard you on calls, seen addresses, possibly photographed documents." Elliot was quiet for 10 seconds. What he felt was not technically surprise, it was the sensation of watching a pattern complete itself, the way a shape becomes recognizable only when the last line is drawn. He felt it the way his father's ledger felt when the outcome column finally got filled in. The number was always either right or wrong, never somewhere between. "She copied documents," he said. "Almost certainly, the specificity is too exact. They're not guessing at which properties, they know the address, the assessed value, and the approximate square footage of the undeveloped parcels adjacent to each one. That's not information available publicly." He stood up. He walked to the single plant by the window, a bird of paradise, barely maintained, and looked at it for a moment. What does Calder Marsh Ventures actually intend to do with the memoranda? Oliver leaned back. "Our theory, based on the company structure, is leverage. They're not capitalized to actually purchase anything. The LLC has $2,000 of registered capital. What they're after is enough proprietary information to bring to a larger investor as bait. A we have accesses play. Colton presents to money, claims a relationship with an insider. Uses your portfolio as proof of concept for his own credibility." "So I'm the product," Elliot said. "Your marriage is the product," Oliver said with the gentleness of someone who has learned to deliver precise damage at low velocity. Elliot picked up the document from the desk. He folded it once along the crease Oliver had already made and placed it in the interior pocket of his jacket. He buttoned the jacket. "I need 3 things," he said. "I need a full financial forensic review of every account she has co-signature access to. I need to know how the document photographs were obtained, specifically whether any of it is transmissible to a third party on hardware we own. And I need to know if anything in the marital estate gives her or any co-filed party a legitimate claim on Meridian Crest assets." Oliver was already writing. On the third point, no, Meridian Crest was formed and capitalized before the marriage, and none of the trust instruments or operating agreements were amended to include spousal interests. She has no claim on the company's assets. She does have community property rights to income earned during the marriage, which is a different but manageable calculation. "Start calculating," Elliot said. He left Oliver's office and sat in the truck for a while without starting it. He looked at the building across the street, a mid-rise with a restaurant on the ground floor, one of his, managed under a third-party operating agreement, doing roughly $1 million in annual revenue. The awning was green. He had chosen that color himself. He wanted, in that moment, to go home and confront her directly. To put the registration document on the kitchen table the way Rona had put that catalog on it, and ask her to explain Caldermarsh Ventures and the woman he had married who had once sat with a dead man's ledger for 40 minutes asking careful questions. He chose not to. He started the truck. He drove to the second property on the list Oliver had mentioned. A restaurant in Tempe with an adjacent, undeveloped parcel, and he walked through it slowly with the property manager discussing a renovation timeline, staying methodical, refusing to hurry. That was a Tuesday. The following Saturday, Colton appeared at their house. Elliot was working at the kitchen table when Vanessa brought him inside. She had not mentioned the visit in advance. Colton stood in the kitchen doorway with the same curated confidence he'd worn at the rooftop event, hands in his pockets, taking in the modest room with an expression he was working to keep neutral. Colton was in the neighborhood, Vanessa said. Of course, Elliot said. He closed his laptop. Coffee? I'm fine, Colton said. He looked at the kitchen table, the papers on it, the old truck visible through the window. Nice place. Cozy, it works, Elliot said. There was a beat of conversation that meant nothing. Colton asked vague questions about what Elliot did, received vague answers, and delivered a brief, unsolicited history of his own real estate trajectory, culminating in a mention of a major deal in the pipeline. Something big in the hospitality corridor that he described with the selective vagueness of a man who wants you to ask him to elaborate. Elliot did not ask him to elaborate. After Colton left, Vanessa stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, not looking at him. He's impressive, she said. He has real ambition. Elliot went back to his laptop. 3 days later, he hired a licensed forensic accountant named Paige Kessler, recommended by Oliver, who had worked with Meridian Crest on a tax matter 2 years prior and was among the 4 people in Arizona who understood the company's structure well enough to audit its exposure with any precision. She was 41 years old. Had a background in forensic CPA work for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division before going private, and communicated exclusively through a secure document sharing platform that required 2-factor authentication. Her first report came back in 6 days. It was 44 pages. She had flagged 17 instances across 14 months in which the household internet network had been used to access cloud storage linked to Elliot's consulting laptop, not the laptop itself, which required a hardware key, but its automated backup mirror, which had been set to sync with a cloud folder that Elliot had set up years before the marriage and never disabled. The folder contained, among other things, 3 years of property assessment records, correspondence with brokers, and draft offering memoranda for exactly the 3 properties Oliver had identified. She had used the household Wi-Fi to access documents she had no authorization to view, copying them through the cloud backup on 7 distinct occasions between 11 months and 3 months prior. The most recent access was 22 days ago. Paige appended a note at the bottom of her summary. This is not a personal matter anymore. This is documentation of commercial espionage conducted against a private company's proprietary assets. You should know that before you decide how to proceed. Elliot printed the summary and added it to the interior pocket of his jacket, next to the company registration document. He had a jacket that was accumulating a particular kind of weight. He sat with it for a while. There was a temperature to the knowledge that went beyond anger. Below it, actually, the way deep water is colder than the surface. He was not performing composure. He had simply arrived at the place on the other side of shock where the only productive thing left was clarity. He called Oliver. I want to know about the anniversary dinner, Elliot said. What about it? Vanessa has been planning it for the last 3 weeks. She wants to do it at Callaway. He paused. She doesn't know Callaway is mine. A moment passed. I see, Oliver said. She's invited 40 people. Apparently Colton is attending. Her mother is attending. He looked at his reflection in the dark kitchen window. I want to attend. Of course you will. You're her husband. I want Paige's full forensic package ready before that evening, signed, certified, with the notarized authorization trail attached. And I want Martin at Callaway briefed. He runs the floor. He knows who I am. I want him to know I'll be in the room. Oliver was quiet for a moment. You're going to let them run the play. They've already run it, Elliot said. I just want to be there for the end of it. Callaway was a 60-seat restaurant in North Scottsdale that Meridian Crest had acquired 18 months prior through a distressed sale. The previous owner had taken on a construction loan that went sideways during the build-out, and the lender had been eager to liquidate. Elliot had walked through it on a Thursday afternoon and identified in 40 minutes which elements of the space were worth preserving and which were structural liabilities. He had kept the original bar, the herringbone oak floor, the kitchen layout. He had replaced the service team and the management infrastructure. The restaurant was, at that moment, in the top 4% of Scottsdale's dining establishments by revenue per seat. He had never eaten a meal there. He had never had a reason to, and then, once Vanessa began planning the anniversary dinner at a restaurant she had found on her own. Never mentioning to him how she'd discovered it. Never noting that she had selected it with Colton's recommendation. Which he knew because Oliver's office had obtained Colton's text messages through discovery proceedings that were, by that point, already quietly underway. He had decided the first time he sat down at one of Calloway's tables, it would be at this specific occasion. He chose a suit for the evening, charcoal gray, the one he had worn exactly once before, to the closing of a $37 million property transaction in Denver. He did not tell Vanessa this. She did not ask. The invitation said 7 o'clock. There were to be 40 guests, which had expanded since he'd last checked to something closer to 200. Because Vanessa and Rona had apparently decided the evening warranted a larger statement. He learned this from Martin, Calloway's floor manager, who had called 3 days prior to confirm that Mrs. Sohn had requested a full buyout of the dining room for the evening. Oliver had approved it. The buyout fee had been waived, because the person approving it owned the building. He drove himself to Calloway on the evening of their 6th anniversary and arrived at 7:15. He walked in through the front door and handed his jacket to the coat check attendant, whose name was Brianna and who had been briefed. He stood for a moment in the entryway, looking out at the room, 40 tables arranged beneath the chandelier his architect had sourced from an estate sale in Leon. 200 people already filling the space, music at the right level, the herringbone floor catching the low lighting he'd specified in the renovation notes. He spotted Vanessa across the room immediately. She was standing with Colton at a high top near the bar, her hand on his forearm, her head tilted at the angle she used when she found someone genuinely interesting. Colton's hand rested on the bar with a proprietary ease that told Elliot everything the forensic documents hadn't already told him. He was wearing the watch, the replica Patek, the one from Guangdong, on his wrist at a dinner he had helped plan at a restaurant he had helped select, apparently under the impression that the evening represented an opportunity. Rona materialized to Elliot's left before he had taken 4 steps into the room. "Well," she said. She looked him over, the charcoal suit, the quiet way he stood, the absence of anything ostentatious. "You dressed up for once. It's our anniversary," Elliot said. "Yes," she let that land. "I noticed Vanessa seems to be enjoying herself already." She glanced toward the bar, then back at him. "Maybe you could try a little harder to be interesting, Elliot, for her sake." He looked at her for a moment, at the precision with which she'd just delivered that sentence, the way it occupied the exact space between cruelty and plausible deniability. He thought of his father's ledger. He thought of the outcome column. He excused himself and found a seat at the back of the room, near the kitchen access corridor where Martin found him 7 minutes later. "Everything's in place," Martin said. He was a composed man of 50, with the bearing of someone who had managed dining rooms in 3 countries. "Miss Kessler's package was delivered to my office this afternoon. Mr. Reed confirmed the legal filings were entered into the record at 4:45. The title documents are in the envelope in the kitchen." "Good," Elliot said. "Shall I have them bring out a menu?" "Please." Martin started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, the floor is yours. It always has been." Elliot ordered the grilled branzino and a glass of water and sat at his table while 200 people celebrated his anniversary around him without any awareness of who he was or what he owned. He ate slowly and watched Colton work the room, the practiced handshakes, the curated anecdotes, the particular energy of a man performing wealth for an audience he believed was fully uninformed. He watched Vanessa become, progressively across the evening, something he had been watching her become for 18 months. A woman who had looked at her life and found it wanting, and had decided the problem was the life rather than the wanting. He watched Rona take a seat near the center of the room, from which position she could observe and adjudicate. He finished the branzino. He set down his fork. It was at this point his plate cleared, his water refilled, the room at full volume and full confidence, that Vanessa finally noticed him sitting there. She crossed the room with a particular velocity, the kind that comes not from urgency but from the decision to make an impression. Colton followed. 4 or 5 people in their immediate circle shifted to form an audience, the way people do when they sense a scene forming. "What are you doing sitting back here?" she said. Not quietly. "Having dinner," Elliot said. "I told you this was an occasion." "I told you," she stopped. She was aware of the audience. She was also, he realized, no longer attempting to manage the awareness. "Do you know how much this evening cost? Do you understand what tonight is supposed to represent?" "Tell me," he said. Colton stepped forward with the confidence of a man who had already decided this was his moment. He put his hand on Vanessa's back, not subtly, not apologetically, in front of 200 guests at the anniversary dinner of the woman's husband. "Maybe," he said, looking at Elliot with the expression that a man wears when he believes the power differential is entirely in his favor, "you should step outside. Let the adults talk." The room had gone partially quiet. "Enough of it. Have him removed," Colton said. He turned to find a staff member. He found Martin, who was standing precisely where he'd been standing since Elliot sat down. 3 feet behind Colton's left shoulder. "You have this man removed." Martin looked at Colton. Then he looked at Elliot. "Removed," Vanessa said, looking directly at Elliot with an expression he had never seen on her face before, a composite of resentment and relief, as if the ability to say this had been building behind a door for 18 months. "He's disrupting the evening." The room was nearly silent now. 200 people, the chandelier from Lion, the herringbone floor, the music. Someone had paused. Martin said, very clearly, "I'm not going to be able to do that." Colton turned. "Excuse me? I'm not going to remove him," Martin said. "He owns the building." A breath passed through the room. Vanessa said, "What?" Elliot stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the room, at Rona, at the 40 guests Vanessa had originally invited and the 160 more who had been added, at Colton, with his $40,000 replica watch and his $2,000 LLC and his practiced anecdotes about a beach house in Montauk, and then he looked at his wife. "The restaurant is mine," he said. "The building it's in is mine." Meridian Crest Hospitality holds 47 properties across 9 states. As of the last audit, they're worth approximately $340 million. He reached into his interior jacket pocket and removed the folded document, the Calder Marsh Ventures registration, the one with both their names on it, and set it on the table between them. "And I know about this." No one in the room moved. "The paperwork was generated 11 days before our last wedding anniversary," he said. "The name on it is yours and his." He looked at Colton. "The purpose is listed as hospitality consulting and property acquisition. The 7 document accesses, all from our household network, are logged, time-stamped, and certified by a forensic accountant whose work was reviewed by 2 attorneys." He paused. "I waited because I wanted to understand the full picture. I understand it now." Colton said, "This is documented," Elliot said. "All of it." He looked at Vanessa one more time. She was standing very still. The woman who had told him she didn't want a performance, she wanted a promise, was standing in the center of the room she'd filled to make a different kind of statement entirely, and her face had gone the particular shade of a person who has realized the ground they thought was solid has been open air for a very long time. Rona was at the back of the room. Her hands were folded. Her expression had not moved. Elliot picked up the document. He put it back in his pocket. He pulled on his jacket, which Martin had already retrieved from coat check and was holding in precisely the way that a man holds a jacket for a person who owns the building. He walked out. He drove home. He parked in the driveway. He sat in the truck for a while with the engine off, looking at the leaky faucet through the kitchen window. He thought about his father's ledger. He thought about the outcome column. He went inside and called Oliver Reed. The following 72 hours moved with the precision of something that had been prepared carefully over many weeks, because it had been. Oliver filed the divorce petition on the morning following the anniversary dinner, along with a civil complaint against Calder Marsh Ventures on the grounds of commercial espionage, unauthorized access to proprietary business records, and tortious interference with business relationships. The complaint named both Vanessa Calder-Sohn and Colton Marsh as defendants. It was supported by Paige Kessler's 44-page forensic report, the 7 time-stamped access logs, the cloud backup records, and a chain of custody certification for the document photographs recovered from the cloud folder. The complaint was not a bluff. Oliver had structured it as a case that could go to trial and had prepared it accordingly. Colton's attorney, a mid-level civil litigator in Phoenix who handled contract disputes and had no particular experience with commercial espionage claims, contacted Oliver within 36 hours of the filing. He opened the conversation by describing the suit as aggressive and overreaching. Oliver responded by sending him Paige Kessler's curriculum vitae, her former FBI case citations, and the notarized access logs. The conversation changed character significantly after that. Paige had flagged something in her secondary review that Oliver considered important enough to run an additional thread of investigation. The Montauk property Colton had described at the rooftop event, a little over 2.4, unloaded recently, did not exist. Paige ran title searches across every coastal county in New York State for properties transferred in the preceding 18 months with a principal seller named Colton Marsh or any LLC registered to him. There were no results. She expanded the search to New Jersey, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. There were still no results. She ran a financial profile of Colton Marsh through 4 credit reporting channels and found a man whose declared liquid assets at the time of filing Calder Marsh Ventures were approximately $14,000, who had 2 personal loan defaults on his record, and whose Porsche Cayenne, the one that had impressed Vanessa at the office, was leased through a subprime lender at a monthly payment that consumed 41% of his declared income. The vintage Patek Philippe Aquanaut on his wrist, Paige confirmed through a specialized authentication firm Oliver engaged, was a replica with an estimated market value of $280. Every status prop, every credential, every anecdote about property and access and connections, the entire architecture of Colton Marsh had been built from inventory he didn't own, wealth he didn't have, and relationships he had manufactured from the raw material of other people's willingness to be impressed. He had used Vanessa the way a borrower uses collateral, not for her sake, not from genuine feeling, but because proximity to a woman who was married to money she didn't know about was a viable approach to the money. He had been positioning himself through Calder Marsh Ventures to present Meridian Crest's proprietary portfolio to an actual investor he had located, a Phoenix-based private equity firm, as evidence of inside access that would justify a finder's fee arrangement. His projection had been a 2 to 3% finder's fee on any transaction that moved through him, using Elliott's own assets as the bait for deals Elliott knew nothing about. When Oliver laid this out in a call with Elliott on Thursday morning, Elliott sat with it for a moment. What was his projected take if it had worked? He asked. On the 3 properties, conservatively, $600,000 to $800,000 in fees. Elliott was quiet. He was never romantically invested, Oliver confirmed, as if Elliott had asked. The communications we obtained through discovery are consistent with a business arrangement that required Vanessa's cooperation and rewarded her accordingly. He was offering her a cut of the fees. She was offered, per the message thread, 12%. The number was specific enough that it landed with a particular weight, 12%. She had looked at her marriage, at 6 years, at a man who had bought a wedding on a Thursday in October and called it a promise, and had calculated that 12% of a fraud she helped commit was the better arrangement. Rona Calder's role was simpler, and in some ways worse. She had not been part of the financial scheme directly. She had no legal exposure. What she had been part of was the sustained, methodical erosion of her daughter's confidence in her husband, the cultivation of a specific kind of dissatisfaction, the steady pressure of comparison to her sister's house and her son-in-law's title and Colton Marsh's curated illusions. She had fertilized the ground. She was not liable for what grew. Elliott did not pursue Rona legally. He did not contact her. She was her daughter's problem now, and he had decided, in that call with Oliver on Thursday morning, exactly where the line was between justice and punishment. He did not want punishment. He wanted the record to be accurate and the assets to be protected. Vanessa's attorney opened settlement negotiations on Friday afternoon. She was represented by a family law specialist named Hendricks, who had reviewed the civil complaint and advised his client apparently to treat the litigation exposure as real. Elliott instructed Oliver to be direct. The community property calculation was fair, and he would honor it. she would receive the value of her equity and marital income during the 6 years, which Oliver had calculated at a number that was generous and correct. She would receive nothing from Meridian Crest, because Meridian Crest predated the marriage and had been carefully isolated from the marital estate from its founding. She would retain no access to any Meridian Crest records, proprietary or otherwise, and would sign a non-disclosure agreement that was specific and enforceable. Calder Marsh Ventures was dissolved by court order within 3 weeks of the filing. Colton Marsh's attorney settled the commercial espionage claim for an amount that Elliott directed entirely to a scholarship fund at Arizona State, his alma mater, the school he had attended on a partial scholarship and a second job pouring concrete. The fund was set up in his father's name, the Bernard G. Sohn Memorial Scholarship for students in business and finance. The first 3 recipients were selected that same semester. 47 restaurants continued operating under Meridian Crest, none of them aware of anything that had happened. The general managers received their usual monthly reports. The kitchen staff at Callaway worked their shifts. The branzinos stayed on the menu. The chandelier from Lion continued to catch the light. Martin sent Elliott a brief text the week after the dissolution was finalized. The herringbone floor is holding up well. Come in sometime when there's no occasion. Elliott replied, I will. 8 months after the anniversary dinner, Elliott sat at the kitchen table in the Scottsdale house. The leaky faucet had been repaired, finally. By a plumber he'd called the same week the divorce was finalized, and he opened his father's ledger. He hadn't opened it since the night Oliver first showed him the Calder Marsh registration. He turned to the last entry his father had made, the one from 2001, the $4.2 million outcome written in his father's compressed, deliberate hand, with the note beside it, patience is not passive. It is the decision to gather information before committing. He sat with that for a while. He thought about the restaurant. He thought about 200 people, the chandelier, the herringbone floor, the moment Martin had said 4 words, he owns the building, and the way the room had breathed in response. He thought about Vanessa's face in that moment, which had not looked victorious, which had not looked wronged, which had looked, most precisely, like a person who had been so certain of the dimensions of a room that discovering the room had no ceiling was more disorienting than it was devastating. He thought about Colton and his $280 watch, and his $14,000, and his careful performance of a life he had never built. He did not feel triumph. What he felt was quieter than that and more durable, the specific satisfaction of a person who ran the numbers before committing and found the outcome column contained exactly what the data had predicted. He closed the ledger. He set it on the kitchen table. He looked at the repaired faucet for a moment. Then he opened his laptop, pulled up the Meridian Crest portfolio dashboard, and began reviewing an assessment report for a distressed property in Tucson that had good bones and catastrophically bad management. He made 3 notes in the margin. He scheduled a walkthrough for the following week. He thought about what his father would have written in the outcome column. He thought he already knew. If this story stayed with you, there's something worth naming in it. Not about wealth and not about revenge. Revenge is just impatience wearing a more satisfying costume. What this story is actually about is the difference between the value someone assigns to you and the value you have actually built. Those 2 numbers are almost never the same. And the gap between them belongs entirely to whoever is willing to do the harder, slower work of keeping accurate records. Vanessa looked at Elliott and saw the truck, the modest house, the vague consulting work, the silence when her mother pressed. She saw everything that could be measured by comparison and nothing that required patience to understand. Colton looked at the same man and saw a mark, an instrument, an access point, someone whose actual value he planned to harvest without acknowledgement or consent. Rona looked at him and saw a ceiling for her daughter. None of them looked long enough or carefully enough to see what was actually there. The ledger on Elliott's kitchen table had belonged to a man who drove a practical car and kept a cracked driveway and never needed anyone else to confirm the value of a patient, documented decision. That ledger is the whole story. The restaurant, the $340 million, the filing, the chandelier, the branzino, those are the outcome column. The ledger itself is what mattered. The habit of writing things down accurately, including the hard entries, including the months when the numbers looked bad, including the people whose behavior produced data you didn't want to have but needed to record. If you've ever been told that what you're building isn't worth much because it isn't loud enough, visible enough, or impressive enough by someone else's particular measure, you already know what this story is about without needing to be told. We tell stories like this every week. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one, and share this with someone who needed to hear it today. And if you've ever had to choose between confronting someone early and waiting until you had the full picture, tell us in the comments. We read all of them.